I've been asked to come today to talk a little bit about our Newpin program. The introduction obviously is that has been given is pretty much what we've got up here. We do work very closely with FACS and NGOs in terms of referrals, and obviously that's increasing at the moment in terms of where the sector is heading. So this is a diagram from our practice framework, and it looks at what we call lenses and elements. We use that term a lot in Newpin. So we talk a lot about the way that we see our parents, the way we look at the circumstances for our parents, and making sure that we are being curious from all these different areas. So attachment-informed practice, developmentally informed, trauma-informed and culturally informed. So they are the four main lenses that we look at when we're looking at working with our families and children. So the things that are around the circle are really the things for practice that we need to be focused on when we are trying to embed some of this. So safety, reflection, congruence, strengths-based, meaningful engagement, group-based and self-care. So as you can see, it's a mix of real reflective practice, but also looking at how we can do that work together in a meaningful way and looking at people's strengths and as part of group process. So what I've done is I've pulled out one of the main elements around our practice, which is safety. So what we know is that we can't start any clear and meaningful work with parents and children unless we've actually been able to move everyone into a safe place. So we know that when we have a lot of negative experiences, we're building those neural pathways where we are sitting in our amygdalas, we're looking at our fight and flight responses. And so a lot of times when we are feeling the threat, so one of those examples would be when our child is removed. Obviously we're in a very defensive position. And then sometimes because a worker might feel that threat, you're also sitting in your amygdala, and so what's happening is we're having a real disconnect in terms of those conversations. So it's really important that we move everyone to a safe place. And so the way we do this is we've got a Newpin safety model. It's a reflective practice model that we look at, and essentially it's a working document. So what we do is we actually use this in our debriefs, in our practice discussions, and also in supervision. So it's really looking at, so these are the key components of that. So we're looking at the elements of pacing. So we know for parents they're coming in from different circumstances, environments, they've got lots of things going on, and we are an 18-month program. So for us, we really need to be concentrating on looking at where that parent currently is, supporting them to feel safe, understanding their circumstances, and meaningfully engaging with them. And so that generally for us takes the first 3 months of our program, where we're really trying to be curious, we're really trying to understand what that parent has gone through, what that child has gone through, and gather some more information about that. Creating space. So in terms of creating space, there's two components to that. One is about environment, and I know we've talked a little bit about today how we create environments for quality contact. So at Newpin, what we have is a therapeutic environment that we set up like a home, and each of those rooms are set up to replicate how a normal home would look. And what we're able to do then is work on the triggers that come up for parents and children in that environment. And what we're able to do that in a safe space, we're able to talk that through. And then we're able to create more positive memories that then can create new neural pathways. The other part of creating space is really about how we build that container, that therapeutic container for our parents. So really making them feel that they are safe enough to start disclosing and giving information and feeling vulnerable, and we're able to hold that for them and not judge them, which is a really important part of Newpin, because very often a lot of our parents come in and they are feeling quite judged, they're feeling like they're a bad parent, and we really need to be able to work with them on that and try and change some of that for them and build more positive memories, build self-esteem, and really understand where they're coming from. In terms of boundaries is another really important part of creating safety, because a lot of times we've got unpredictable environments for children and for parents, and we've got a range of circumstances where there's a lack of structure and unpredictability. So what we're really trying to do is to create some boundaries with the parent, so not from a punitive perspective, but really alongside the parent, be able to create some boundaries which put structure in place, where we're looking at rhythm and routine for that parent and also for the child. So when our families come into Newpin, we actually have a set day. They come in, they go into group, their children come in at the same time every day, they all sit down at lunch at the same time every day, and then they go into our play area every day to do their therapeutic play work. And what this does is it really starts creating a safety in terms of predictability. We then have routine, and even the children start to get on board with that. And we've got kids running in and washing their hands to sit down for lunch, so they know the routine. So that's also really important as well. Accountability, so really following through and meaning what you say and doing what you say, and doing that repair when you can't. So oftentimes if you can't make an appointment, or if we've had to prioritise something else, how do we actually make that repair with the parent? I think often because of the experiences our parents and children have had, they can see that as a rejection or not being seen, so it's really important that we acknowledge that for them. Presence. So presence is one of the biggest ones really. In terms of presence, it's how are we being with our parents? How are we modelling that for them in terms of being with their child? So it's really about seeing people. It's about being with people. It's not looking at the clock while you're talking to someone or rushing off to do something. It's actually making that time to be with that parent. So we find that in following these principles, alongside with creating good environments, self-managing and self-reflection, that we're able to start creating a safe space for our parents. So this is a quote that comes from our safety model. So I'll just read it out to you because it's actually quite an important one. So our experiences shape our lens. So being able to reflect upon triggers that arise in our work is important. The experience we then provide for others will flow from our understanding of our own needs and what we need or provide for others. So ultimately it is our ability to see ourselves and then to see others. So in Newpin we do a lot of reflective practice. We do a lot of looking at our own triggers, our own attachments, and how that then transfers into the way that we work with our parents and children. And it's really quite an important part of the role. Because very often, as when we talk about lenses, we bring our own, as we talked about, experiences, our own thoughts and feelings and emotions and biases about various things. So being able to really sit down in a safe space with a supervisor, with your team, and be able to unpack that successfully, you then ground yourself in practice because you understand what is yours and then what it is that you need to be working on with our parents and our children. So these are essentially the key components of the Newpin model. So I'll talk them through a little bit. As we talked about, one of our lenses is a trauma-informed lens, but it's also a psychotherapeutic lens. So what that means is that we look at both unconscious and conscious ways of working. So we often know that when parents and children are they might be acting something out, they might be saying one thing, but under the surface the other things are going on and being triggered. So being able to observe and spend that time with our parents in the centre, we're able to then have good, meaningful and safe conversations around some of those triggers, which is really important. Obviously trauma-informed practice, it's understanding that everyone that walks through our door has experienced trauma. We know that that's affected their ability to, at times, see what's happening for them. So we really need to be able to help, as I keep saying, rebuild those neural pathways through good positive experiences and positive meaning making, both for themselves but also with their children. So I've talked a little bit about conscious work on attachment, but we do a lot of, so we do the Circle of Security as one of our groups. So parents will undertake a therapeutic support group in which they will have an open space to be able to talk about their experiences when they're ready. And we'll also have a what's called a psychotherapeutic psychoeducational group in which we then run various modules each term. And one of those modules is the Circle of Security, which probably a lot of you are familiar with. And then because we have a space after that in our play space, we're able to then work with the parents on some of those concepts. So it might be being able to work on looking at the cues, if they're miscuing, being able to, oh look, Johnny's coming back to you, so how do we greet him and support him? So we've really got a great opportunity to be able to do that. So our play space is really your contact time. So when the contact is ordered for children, we ask that they get brought into the centre so that we can then have that time with them and their parent in that space to be able to do some of this therapeutic play work. What underpins all of that, of course, is making sure that we're addressing child safety and wellbeing. And so a lot of times in groups we talk about safety. We have modules such as keeping children safe that we run. We have our own values, we call it SEERS, where we talk about how we teach our children values and how we value ourselves, which is really important. But it underpins everything. So obviously, as we're working with our parents and children, any risk that arises, we're obviously very conscious of that, and we still need to be following the right processes around that, but also being able to really open up a conversation with mum or dad about that. So as I said, it's a long-term intensive 18-month program. So generally what we find is that's the first 6 to 9 months that the parents spend with us. We're focused on restoration, so it's doing all of this work. It's unpacking, it's rebuilding, it's building capacity. There's a whole range of things that go on. So it's not, I guess, just doing 3 urines a week and attending a drug and alcohol course and finding housing. That's actually not enough. It's actually about the support that we can give parents to rebuild their capacity, but also rebuild their own inner working models, because a lot of our parents themselves have experienced trauma and abuse or difficult circumstances and environments. And so we need to be able to help rebuild their own attachment system, their own internal working model, so that they can then be able to offer that to their child, which is really important. So that's a key part of this work, really. It's about rebuilding that relationship with themselves, but also with their children. So I talked a little bit about the values-based culture. So our values are safety, empathy, equality, respect and self-determination. And we live those values in our centres. We have an 8-week course that we run all of our parents through, and we get them to think about, because some parents don't really know what values are and being valued, so the whole concept of that is new. So it's really about being able to work through those core values, talk about why we would think of those as core values, how we would reflect on ourselves and how we treat ourselves in terms of those values, but then also how we can teach them to our children. But then within the centre, being able to use that as a shared language and a shared culture, which is really important. So we do work with both mums and dads in our centre. So initially we'd started off working just with mums, but what we found when we opened our first centre in Wyong, after we've got 3 in Western Sydney that were already open, and then our first centre that we opened in Wyong, we had an influx of referrals for fathers. So we very quickly adapted and extended our program and created a fathers worker and some fathers resources, and we've now adapted that to all of our centres. So every centre will take fathers and mothers. And we're actually getting a lot of couples. So there's a real trend at the moment in many of our centres where we're getting mums and dads coming in wanting to work on restoration together, which is really nice. So what we do is we will run groups back to back. So there'll be mum and dad will do the same group each term, whether that be Circle of Security, it might be tuning into kids or one of the other groups. And it really gives them an opportunity to be learning the same things at the same time, and then being able to put some of that into practice, but also talking about that. So this is one of the quotes from our evaluation from one of our mums, because all the mums and dads and workers were interviewed for the evaluation, and one of the quotes was this one from a mum talking about how, it was a nice feeling being able to go home and share with Dad and talk about with Dad what they'd both learnt and how they could put that into practice. Obviously, of course, if there is risk between the couple, we will only work with one of the parents. We won't actually work with the other. If we're unaware of that and that starts to emerge as we're doing our groups, then we really need to look at the safety of the couple, but also then how we work that through and support that couple. When we looked at some of the stats from the evaluation, about 1 in 3 are referred to our program, which is really quite a good number. As I said, they receive the same program whether they're single or coupled, and we also have stepdads and stepmums that come into the program as well, because we really feel it's important that everyone's getting the same information and being able to put the same things into practice. We found that they have steadily increased over the period of the social benefit bond, which is really great because it means we're giving dads more opportunity to participate in the program. And the other thing I think is that we really use it as an opportunity to role model. So being able to have female and male staff in the centre, really role modelling healthy relationships and healthy communication. And we often have mums and dads make comment on that. Oh, that's interesting, He really, respected you then in that conversation. And the other thing that we had was really quite nice is we had one of the fathers workers, they do lots of different things, but in this particular centre, the dad would cook lunch for the mums. So for some of these mums, they've never been treated well by a man. So, really, that for them, that was huge, being able to be offered a meal and some nurturing through food, because as we know, food links very strongly to attachment and the way people see food in their worlds as well, and kiddies. So we do provide some flexibility for our dads, because we know that they obviously work and need to work, and if it's a couple, then one of them often needs to work because they need to be providing housing and other things to get their children home. So we do provide evening groups for our dads as well, so that they can come along. Probably the only difference really with our mums and dads groups would be around the communication aspect. So often, women tend to be able to express themselves a little bit more freely and more quickly in groups, whereas some of our men are obviously struggling with some of the vulnerabilities and being able to express that. So it's really about, again, the pacing with our dads and being able to utilise other expressive therapies and other ways of being able to allow them to move through some of their anger and shame and other things. It's a very different way of working with dads. It's far less vocal and more pacing and holding and really listening, I think, because the strongest motivator for our dads is their kids. That's their focus. They're very, very focused on, and they keep that focus throughout, and so what we need to do is keep bringing them back to, okay, how are we looking at you and how you're moving through some of this stuff too, because when we get to the other end, we need to be able to make sure that some of those things, also need to be addressed for you. So therapeutic play is obviously, part of it is, again, making sure that parents feel safe and that, again, sometimes they don't know how to play. Their own experiences have meant that they haven't had that opportunity themselves. So when they get into a contact space and they're looking at toys or they're looking at things, they're overwhelmed and they don't really know what to do with that. So it is really important that we, again, we're curious, we lead, we guide. It's less about taking notes and judging, if they don't know how to do A or B, or they haven't been able to heat the bottle up the right way. It's how do we show them how to do that? This is the important stuff. A lot of these parents don't know how to do this, and that's okay. We have to make that be okay and then be able to teach them and support them and show them how to do that. And we have the luxury of having 18 months to do that with our parents, which is really lovely. So again, it's working on tolerance capacity. So sometimes, kiddies will be acting out for various reasons, and then mum will start to, going back into the amygdala a bit, how are we going to deal with this? And so again, it's how we intervene in that, how we help them learn how to regulate themselves, but also then regulate their child at the same time. And that's a skill, and that's something that we repeat, and it's repetitious, that we try and instill in our parents, so that when they do have their child restored, we're very able to, they're very able to do this on their own. So in terms of after the children are restored, we do work with the parents for another 9 months, so altogether 18 months. So we do a preservation phase. We often talk about pre-restoration and post-restoration, and I think it's not actually capturing what it is that we do. We do preservation, that's what we do, the back end of our work. So the parents will still come in and do the same things that they've been doing for the first 9 months. It's just they now have the reality of having their children home. And all the things that we've been talking about start popping up, and parents are wanting to come in and get some relief and have a coffee and sit back, and that's the time where people can start making judgments, because it's like, oh, she's not paying attention to him over there, but then we need to be curious. We need to understand, well, why? Why is that? Has mum had a rough night? Has she not had enough sleep? So it's asking all these, curious questions and the right questions to be able to then put some things into place for them. Again, the big one, and I think a few people have talked about this today, which is about not making assumptions. So I think that's a huge one. I think often we get limited information and we choose to make assumptions around that because either we haven't got time, we need to make quick decisions, or we're looking through a particular lens. So I guess what we try to do is observe, take note of things, and then as a group sit down and really try and unpack that and understand that. But over time, it's almost we're taking these pieces of the puzzle and we're being thoughtful about them, we're asking good questions, we're feeding back to you because you might have other information that we don't have as well. So how do we assess? So our main assessment tool is the North Carolina Family Assessment Tool, and some of you might be familiar with it, some might not, but it's what we've been using for the length of the bond. And part of our URBUS study, they did across, I think it was 91 parents, they did an analysis of all the NICFAS across 6 to 18 months. And the largest areas of family functioning that improved were these 3, which we're really happy about because obviously they're the ones that we're trying to focus on. Family safety, parental capacity and readiness for reunification. So that was really quite good to hear. So that's our tool, but we obviously also use family plans, but we work alongside you with your case plans. So we're not case managers, we don't do case management, we don't do a large component of casework or a therapeutic service. So we're working alongside you. We do aspects of casework when we've negotiated that at case conference time or other conversations, because sometimes it is helpful for us to be able to, take mum to an appointment or to make some referrals as well. But obviously everything is done in collaboration. So again, this is from our URBUS report, and from all the interviews from parents, interviews from FACS, looking at the reunification outcomes, these were seen as the most successful factors in terms of getting a child home. So I think for me, one of the main ones is probably that we all are on the same page with a joint view that restoration is possible. I think when that has happened and when everyone is on, we're all on the same page about, okay, what do we need to do to achieve this and what are our roles and responsibilities, even when, that there's been a good court process for parents, that's when we've found that, that's really worked for the parent, and even having the carer on board. So, oftentimes carers, it can be, that they've been placed with a child that's going towards adoption, and so we've got an adoptive carer working on a restoration plan. That's difficult, and that's difficult for carers as well as parents. So it's all those things that add up and contribute towards, I suppose, working in a joint way. But when we can do it, it can be really rewarding and successful for parents. I guess the other big one that often comes up for us that we really, are happy about is when parents are able to acknowledge and take responsibility for the reasons why their child has come into care. And when they do that, there's a deep shame that underlies that for parents. So it's really about how we can hold that for parents and be able to allow them to take that responsibility, but then be able to move forward in that. Because that's a huge thing for parents when they're able to acknowledge that. So there's a few others there. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. And obviously having strong motivation, for change is always one that we see.